Few writers have shaped modern imagination the way H.G. Wells did. In his works, he foresaw the rise of aircraft, tanks, space travel and nuclear weapons, achievements that earned him the title Father of Science Fiction. While he did not invent the genre outright, his works defined it, and nowhere is that more evident than in his 1898 novel The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds is by far H.G. Wells' most successful and most well-known work, having never gone out of print in all of the 127 years of its existence. It has spawned nearly countless retellings and derivative works, as well as a short-lived panic in the United States when the novel was delivered in a realistic breaking news format via radio in 1938. Without doubt, the most lasting image from this story, regardless of which incarnation, is the Martian Fighting Machine, the enormous tripedal craft the invaders used to so efficiently demolish the world of mankind.
Before we begin, a quick announcement. We've teamed up with Constellation Miniatures, a project focused on creating free templates for wargaming miniatures using materials you likely already have at home. These aren't meant to replace high-end models, but they are cheap, easy to make, and fully customizable. You can reuse the same template to build as many miniatures as you like, so assembling an army doesn't have to be expensive. You don't even need a printer. Just follow the guide, cut, fold, glue, paint, and you're ready to go. Over the coming weeks, we'll be releasing a new booklet each week, with the goal of making the wargaming hobby more accessible to everyone. If you'd like to get involved, you can design your own models, improve existing ones, translate the guides, or simply build and test them. At the end of the day, the most important thing is to have fun. And now, back to the Martians.
Better known as the tripod, the fighting machine serves as both the primary weapon and transport of the Martian invaders. It looms roughly 100 feet tall, standing on 3 immense legs attached to a compact central body and crowned with a rounded head. From this head hang rope-like appendages alongside 2 larger tentacular arms. The tripod was described as being constructed of dull grey or whitish metal, often interpreted as armoured plating. Wells himself never illustrated the machines, but he approved the haunting 1906 artwork of Brazilian artist Henrique Alvim Corrêa, whose depictions remain among the most faithful to the original text, even if their googly eyes make them look somewhat silly to the modern audience. Over time, other interpretations became even more iconic. The sleek, towering tripods from the 2005 movie, starring Tom Cruise, are perhaps the most widely recognised today. Another fan favourite design appears in Jeff Wayne's 1978 musical adaptation of the novel, which can be found for free on YouTube. Despite not being a tank per se, the Martian Fighting Machine is one of the first depictions of an armoured, self-propelled vehicle designed for war. As no tripedal lifeforms exist on Earth, it is worth discussing the envisioned gait of the fighting machine. The earliest depictions, created by Warwick Goebel for the serial publications of the story in Pearson's Magazine and the Cosmopolitan in 1897, show machines that resemble barbecue grills with fixed truss-like legs on which they spin about, one over the other, like a 3-legged gyroscope. Wells was very upset with this depiction, as it was totally unlike the fluidly moving organic machines he had envisioned. The fighting machine is typically depicted walking with 2 legs in front and a single leg in the rear. The rear leg steps forward, either underneath the body or totally through the 2 front legs, and one at a time, the 2 front legs take steps forward until the motion repeats. Wells describes the gait of the fighting machines as rolling, and occasionally wrote of them having 2 feet in the air as they walked. Across all interpretations, this is unique to the novel. As this was a very unusual stance, it may be reserved for when the machine needs to move quickly, as a form of galloping run. Being made of metal with many dangling parts, the fighting machine makes a cacophonous noise as it walks. In many depictions, the legs are unjointed tentacles, similar to the arms. However, in the novel, Wells writes that the legs have knees, and that the joints of the legs produce puffs of green smoke when they move. Across all Martian technology, they made no use whatsoever of the wheel. Nearly all joints in the fighting machine consisted of parts sliding over friction bearings, with some limited use of fixed pivots. Power was transmitted through the limbs by means of mechanical muscles. These muscles were long elastic sheaths containing stacks of metal discs. When electricity was passed through the stack, the discs became polarized and contracted, much the same way biological muscles function. The head of the fighting machine is mounted atop the body and is able to swivel left and right. At the front of the head, depending on the depiction, are usually illustrated 2, 3, or sometimes just 1 illuminated windows or spotlights that resemble eyes. Around the top of the head is a cowling that is often likened to a hood, in the sense of an article of clothing. Hanging on the rear of the head, in the manner of a backpack, is a basket for containing collected humans, which are picked up by the machine's arms and deposited therein. The body which forms the core of the machine is usually only depicted to be large enough to sufficiently connect the head to the legs. Inside the head is seated the single Martian occupant. The Martians are octopus-like creatures the size of a bear, composed almost entirely of brain. The main body or head, of which there is no distinction, is solely dedicated to containing the brain and lungs. There are no other organs. At the front of the body is a face having 2 large dark-coloured disc-like eyes and a triangular beak-like mouth. On either side of the mouth are bundles of 8 small tentacles which the Martians use to locomote and to interact with the world. In the gravity of Earth, 2.5 times greater than that of Mars, this is accomplished with great difficulty. At the rear of the body is a circular tympanic membrane that allows the Martian to hear. The Martians have no sense of smell and no sex. Reproduction is accomplished by budding. Martian physiology is such that they do not sleep, do not get fatigued, and do not get sick, though the latter fact is due to them having eradicated disease from their planet through technological advancement. Rather than ingesting food for sustenance, the Martians transfused the blood of other beings into their own veins. On Mars, they kept a race of anthropoid beings to feed off of. On Earth, humans would be their cattle. The Martians, as a species, have no ability to vocalize, with the sole exception of a hoot sound they emitted prior to feeding. This is believed to have been an involuntary response without meaning. The Martians communicate telepathically, sometimes remaining still for long periods to engage in private thoughts. The telepathic range is unknown, but it seems to be able to reach between fighting machines when they are not spaced too far apart. At a distance, the fighting machines are able to signal each other with a loud howling call. The meaning of which depends on the pitch. This sound can be a greeting, a cry for help, or an exaltation of victory. Whether intentional or not, it serves as a terror weapon, similar to the Jericho trumpets used on German Ju-87 dive bombers. In the 2005 Paramount movie, and some depictions which came after, the ululation is replaced with a deep 3-tone horn, which seemingly serves only as a terror weapon. The primary Martian weapon was the heat ray. This device generated a beam of extreme heat, which could be aimed in any direction. Any object the beam touched immediately was consumed with a bright white fire. People were reduced to skeletons, trees burst into flame on contact, and solid structures like brick buildings were vaporized outright. When the heat ray fired, it produced a flash of light from its origin point. However, the beam of the ray was not light like that of a laser, but a clear haze, similar to the surface of a road on a hot day. 2 forms of the heat ray existed. The first was the heat ray mounted on the Martian's landing cylinders, which was fixed on the end of a long, thin, many-jointed arm, which raised it high in the air. This form of the heat ray resembled a spinning, inclined, disc-shaped reflector, which appeared to wobble as it spun. The other form of the heat ray, carried by the fighting machine, resembled a camera and had to be aimed at the target. The fighting machine carried its heat ray on the end of one of its arms. The second optional weapon the Martians employed was known to humanity as black smoke. This was a heavy, extremely dense vapour, inky black in colour. It was deployed in canisters fired from a discharger carried by the fighting machine. The discharger resembled a gun barrel, but produced no flash when it fired, only a dull thud sound. Upon impact with the ground, the black smoke canister broke open and released the gas, which would expand upward and outward into a billowing mound, before falling and settling along the ground. As the black smoke was very dense, it would flow like a liquid to the lowest point it could find. Inhalation of the black smoke caused instant death. Interestingly, the black smoke was rendered inert by water. Whenever a pool of smoke found its way to water, it would convert into a powdery brown scum and sink. After deploying black smoke, the fighting machines would usually disperse it by spraying steam jets over the clouds of gas. If this was not done, it would settle naturally after a day and a half to 2 days, rendered inert by the moisture in the air, and leave behind a black powder on the ground. As Wells had predicted the invention of the tank, so too did he predict the use of chemical warfare, which claimed so many real lives in World War I. The first shot in the war between the two worlds was fired at midnight, 12th of August 1900, Earth time. An enormous space gun with a bore somewhere in the range of 27.5 meters, or 90 feet, fired a projectile from Mars aimed for the outskirts of London, United Kingdom. This shot was followed by 9 more spaced 24 Earth hours apart, so that, to account for the rotation of the Earth, all would land in the same place with 1 day's delay between them. The final shot was fired on the 21st of August. The reason for the Martian invasion was simple: survival. Mars, once vibrant, was dying as its core cooled and its oceans receded, leaving only a third of the planet covered in water. Meanwhile, just 35 million miles closer to the Sun, Earth appeared young, fertile, and from the Martians' perspective, populated only by insignificant wildlife. The first Martian projectile landed on a Thursday night in June 1901, after 11 months of transit time, embedding itself in the sand on Horsell Common near Woking, 22 miles from London. The projectiles, usually referred to as cylinders, as the cylinder rear section was all that could be seen of them once they had landed, measured about 90 feet across. The length is unknown, but must have been considerable. The rear of the projectile consisted of a cap threaded onto the body of the shell, and it was via this that the crew and cargo entered and exited. The first cylinder took nearly a full day to unscrew, and shortly after the first Martian had exited and breathed the air of Earth that Friday evening, the cylinder unleashed its heat ray on the people who had gathered around it, and just like that, war was declared. At midnight, a second cylinder crashed into the woods north of Shearwater near the New Zealand Golf Club. With any hope of peaceful contact fading, it was shelled that afternoon to little effect. At around 6 p.m, the first fighting machine had crawled out of the first cylinder and was now heading toward the second landing site, destroying a field gun and pulverising the men of the Royal Cardigan Rifles in the process. While making a detour to demolish the town of Woking, a second fighting machine rose from the first cylinder and headed after the first, though both later returned to the landing site of the first cylinder. That midnight, a third cylinder would land north of Pireford, and the two machines would travel to it, going southward over Maybury Hill, presumably to assist in unscrewing before returning back to their own landing site, where a third tripod had just been constructed. On Sunday morning, the military response to the crisis was in full swing. Word had not yet reached command of the destruction of the force at Horsell, mainly because there was no one left alive to report it. But new units and artillery batteries were slowly being brought in. Their arrival disrupted civilian evacuation efforts at Weybridge, as passenger services were halted to give priority to soldiers and guns heading for what was slowly transforming into a front. At midday, 4 fighting machines from the first and second cylinders advanced on Chertsey and Weybridge, joined by a 5th approaching from the direction of Pireford. The machines advanced, battering the town of Chertsey and inflicting casualties on the British troops. However, when the lead machine reached the River Thames, between Weybridge and Shepperton, it was blown to pieces by a well-hidden battery of 6 12-pounders, making it the first casualty suffered by the invaders. Remaining Martians demolished the town of Weybridge in retaliation, before collecting their fallen comrade and withdrawing back to Horsell Common. Seriously shaken by the battle at Weybridge, but bolstered by the fact the Martians' fighting machines were not invulnerable, the British Army hurried to deploy all the defences it could muster, with artillery being railed in from all over the UK. The Martians, meanwhile, were leisurely transferring their supplies from the second and third cylinders to their main base on Horsell Common. When finished, 3 of the fighting machine operators parked their machines and entered the cylinder to assist with the work, while the 4th fighting machine stood guard. At 8 p.m. Sunday night, 3 fighting machines resumed the offensive, first cautiously heading south through Byfleet and Pireford toward Ripley, then turning east toward Weybridge. In the pine woods of St. George's Hill, one machine stumbled into a hidden gun battery and was struck in the leg. The guns reloaded and fired again at the downed machine, but missed. The fallen Martian cried out for assistance, and the nearest fighting machine to the south quickly came to its aid. Both machines then fired their heat rays on the gun battery, detonating the ammunition supply. Afterward, the machines stood still and silent, their operators apparently conversing telepathically and formulating a plan. The Martian in the downed machine crawled out and set about repairing the leg, which he did with surprising speed. It was about 9 p.m. when the fighting machine again rose. The 3 tripods were then joined by 8 more, equipped with black smoke dischargers. They also brought with them 3 additional dischargers for the other 3 machines. Once these had been passed out, Martians arranged themselves in a crescent formation, bowing outward from Woking, with Weybridge on one end and Send on the other. For a long moment both sides stood facing the other in the silence of the night, but then the machines opened up with the canisters. This was the first use of the black smoke, a weapon the likes of which no one on the human side had ever even conceived of. The canisters were lobbed over every hill and into every woods the Martians suspected might hide a battery of guns. After all of the soldiers had succumbed to the black smoke, the fighting machines waded into the gas and dispersed it with jets of steam. That night, the Martians were also targeted by 95-ton siege guns, which fired blindly into the night. However, they too were soon overcome. The Martians continued their advance through Monday morning and would not be taken by surprise again. Anywhere there could be hidden guns, they smothered with the black smoke, and anywhere there were exposed guns, they cut down with the heat ray. The crescent formation spread out into a line abreast, reaching from Hanwell in the north to Malden in the south. It was only when Richmond and Kingston were destroyed and the Martians headed toward London that Londoners realised the grave danger they were in. It was inconceivable, until it happened, that anything should threaten London. In the pre-dawn hours on Monday morning, London's population of 6 million were roused from sleep by the frantic clanging of sirens and church bells. Now they began a stampede for their lives out of the city. With the gun batteries destroyed, no one could oppose the Martian advance. Royal Navy destroyers and torpedo boats sailed up the Thames to aid the fight, but their crews mutinied and fled. Only sporadic, ineffective attempts to set mines and traps continued. By midday on Monday, the Martians had taken London. On Wednesday came the greatest battle of the war. The Martians blocked off the Thames, and ships helping evacuate London began up and down the coast. In a reverse foreshadowing of the great Dunkirk evacuation 39 years later, every form of vessel imaginable was sent to Thames estuary to lend their assistance. The might of the Royal Navy was notably absent. The only warship among the evacuation fleet was the ironclad torpedo ram HMS Thunderchild, laying low in the water several miles offshore. Sometime after 2 p.m, gunfire was heard from the direction of Shoeburyness, and HMS Thunderchild began to build up steam. Soon, 3 tripods appeared and began wading into the water, causing the evacuation ships to scatter in panic. In an effort to protect them, and with unfaltering bravery seldom seen in the history of naval warfare, HMS Thunderchild swung about and drove at full speed toward the Martians, her twin funnels belching fire. The 3 fighting machines waded so far out to sea that only their heads and upper bodies remained above the surface. As to why they did not fire their heat rays immediately, it has been jokingly suggested that, coming from such an arid planet, the the Martians had no concept of what a boat was and were dumbfounded by what approached them. As HMS Thunderchild closed in, it was engaged by a black smoke discharger. The canister burst against the ship's starboard side, but Thunderchild passed through the cloud so quickly that it had little effect. Seeing this, the 3 fighting machines began to separate and retreat from the ironclad. One of them raised its heat ray and fired, punching a hole straight through the ship's deck and out the other side. Thunderchild's guns answered with a rolling volley, destroying the Martian. A second fighting machine then fired its heat ray, detonating Thunderchild's powder magazine, and the ship went up in a brilliant flash. The fighting machine staggered from the force of the explosion, only to steady itself in time to be run down beneath the still moving hulk of the ship. When the smoke and steam had cleared away, the third fighting machine was gone, with there scarcely having been enough time for it to retreat. Many people choose to ascribe this kill to Thunderchild as well. Despite this tremendous victory, it would not be repeated. The Martians would never again allow a ship to get so close. They had made the same mistake with field artillery, and had learned the lesson there as well. Command of the oceans was not necessary to their conquest. Once the ships had no more place to dock, they would succumb in short order. With the foremost military power on Earth defeated, the Martians viewed their conquest as complete. Further extermination of humanity would only rob future Martian colonists of food. Hereafter, the role of the fighting machine shifted from an engine of destruction to a sentinel. The tripod stood guard over the construction works at the cylinders, and occasionally ventured through their conquered land to pluck whatever humans they desired for consumption. At midnight on Monday, the 5th cylinder landed on a house in Sheen with a fighting machine guard within hours. Very quickly, the Martians set about construction operations, building noises ringing out, followed by green smoke from the cylinder's pit. By the start of Tuesday, the cylinder produced their first handling machine. It had 5 tentacular legs and a large number of arms tipped with claws, spatulas, and all manner of other implements. The arms were retractable, allowing them to clear out of the way for when only certain appendages were in use. Except for its metal construction, everything about the handling machine's movement seemed organic, even more fluid and lithe than the fighting machine. The Martian operator sat exposed on the machine's back, and rearward of him was the cargo compartment, where collected humans could be deposited by the machine's arms. Another thing produced by the 5th cylinder would be a Martian plant known as the red weed, which grew explosively starting from its landing site. Whether the Martians had brought it purposefully, or if it had hitchhiked on their machinery, is unknown, but within days it covered for miles the area around the cylinder, extirpating all native Earth plants. Late at night on Friday or Saturday, a surviving human witness at the cylinder recalled hearing 2 volleys of 6 artillery shots. Where these guns were located is not known, but this was the last resistance offered to the Martians in the London area. The next Saturday, a week later, the Martian operation at the 5th cylinder picked up and departed, leaving only scattered refuse behind. The Martians had, for the most part, abandoned South London, concentrating at a larger base around the 7th cylinder on Primrose Hill. Where the 8th, 9th and 10th cylinders landed is not recorded. On the 3rd Friday, 3 weeks after the beginning of the invasion, the Martians ceased. Around their camp on Primrose Hill, fighting machines stood motionless. The few eyewitnesses alive in London reported that for part of the day the idle machines stood and screamed over and over in a long, mournful howl. They were crying for help, but none came. Many of the fighting machines collapsed, almost 50 in total in the camp. Some remained on their feet by the time the vocalizations went quiet. Every Martian on the Earth was dead. Killed by the bacteria they had so long ago eradicated on Mars, they had forgotten ever existed. As one of the foundational works of science fiction, The War of the Worlds may be one of the most reinterpreted and transformed works in history. There are hundreds of known issues of the original novel, and countless adaptations that translate the story to another time and place. Most of these have their own unique depictions of the fighting machine, though often only as a cover image. To list them all would be impossible, but here are some of the more famous designs. That concludes our look into the Martian Fighting Machine. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shuford, Mick Van Ipperen, Owen M, R Rob and Sopwith21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.